Hey watercolor wizards, Hajra here. I painted these easy fall raccoons in another video while reviewing Animation watercolor brushes and comparing them to Billy Showell watercolor brushes. In today's video, I'll be painting another fun autumn piece in a similar style, using Billy Showell watercolor brushes to wrap up my product comparisons from last time. Thanks for parking your brushes here and let the epic painting adventures begin. As usual, I'm going to start from a simple pencil sketch and use a limited palette. Autumn and winter are my favorite seasons, and few things are more autumn infused than maple leaves, harvest berries, and foxes. And I've drawn them all together in one piece in case anyone wonders which season I'm projecting here. And I'm going to go with a triad of quinacridone gold, quinacridone red, and Winsor blue because it makes for a really magical, warm fall color scheme. And if you're looking to paint a page full of fall leaves yourself, these three colors will really help set the mood perfectly. By the way, sketches and video scripts for this project, as well as art blogs and other art extras and rewards, are available for patrons supporting me on Patreon. I've actually been off of YouTube and Instagram for a few weeks, and a handful of you have asked me about it. I'm back now, but I had to put aside my art and art videos for a bit because my dad was suddenly ill and in the ER 3 times this past month, and my parents came in town to visit me. Any healing thoughts and prayers sent my way are much appreciated. I made this fox piece a little larger and more involved because the Billy size 2 brush I used was much easier to paint and blend with than the Anna spotters I used for the raccoons. I used a synthetic angle brush to blend out edges for this fox piece, and it's not a Billy brush, but you might know that I never use any of my sable brushes for edge lifting and softening, and the Billy sable brush is no exception. It really helps keep natural hair brushes lasting longer that way. I still did the majority of the painting with the Billy number 2 brush, and it was up to the task. It carried a lot of water and pigment, and the fine tip was excellent for developing thin lines and corners to the leaves. As I said in the raccoon video, I personally prefer the Billy Showell brushes over the Animation brushes because of the gliding, softer hair, the better paint and water load, and the very delicate fine tip. Both types of brushes can do fine work in detailing, but the Billy brushes do much better washing, glazing, and blending than the Anna spotters, as well as flared out dry brush marks that the Anna brushes don't do at all. And I've said it all already in more detail in the raccoon video, which I hope you've checked out. To add something new and noteworthy, I will say that the Billy brush is less good for lots of repeated spotting than the Anna brushes, which are officially spotter brushes, and so it makes sense that they are better for small repeated dabs. The Billy brush does fine detailing just fine, but it's fair to say that when the detailing is repeated dabs more than fine lines, it would have been better to switch to a brush with a less long tip. I was reviewing the Billy brush here, so I stuck with it for all the details in this fox project, but in a non-product review painting, I would have switched to a spotter for the dabbing and spotting areas, and that's because a long tip brush is fatiguing when applying too many dot shapes because its tip will wobble due to being so long, and more muscle control on the brush is needed for each dot to keep it small and round. This is fine if you are only doing a few dots, but if you're doing a lot of small berries and highlights like I did in this piece, it's better to switch to a spotter. That's exactly what spotters are made for, and it's the one place where they will shine more than other brushes, including a long-tipped brush like Billy's watercolor brushes. Of course, for the teeny leaf and petal veins or thin stem lines, the Billy brush is excellent, better than the Anna spotters, and the Billy brush can be used for spotting and dotting, but for a whole lot of little circles like the berries here, a shorter, firmer spotter will just be less tiring. You can still get more painting techniques out of a Billy Showell watercolor brush than with the limiting Animation spotter brushes, so if you have to buy only one, I'd still recommend the Billy brush, but synthetic spotters of any brand are pretty cheap, and it's really handy to have a few around for steady dabs and dots. I used Strathmore mixed media paper for this piece, and yes, it's no Arches watercolor paper, so you have to mind how many layers you're doing on this less sturdy and less sized paper. But after working on Moleskine watercolor journal and Strathmore mixed media journal paper for about 24 paintings this year, more than I actually did on Arches paper this year, I did learn that I can do a lot more on these papers than I previously assumed. I've done some pretty decent pieces on these cheaper papers in watercolor, gouache, watercolor crayon, and ink. Most of the work was just in the first 1 or 2 painting projects I did on these papers, just learning how paint and water handle on them versus on the Arches paper, and it was enlightening to find I could learn to use and like them as much as I did. I have plenty of Arches I need to use, so I'm not going to be buying more of these cheaper papers once my journal cachet runs out, but I can say now from experience that if you can't afford Arches all the time, you can use Moleskine or Strathmore for projects that use a few layers of watercolor. They're excellent for simple 1-layer ink and wash pieces, and very good for intermediate complexity watercolor or gouache pieces with 3 or 4 layers. Since there was so much red and orange in this piece, I tried to vary the temperatures of the various reds and oranges a lot for clarity. Even if you have a limited color scheme, if you're using a triad, this is usually very doable. You can see that I made the fox a cooler, cleaner red in comparison to the red-orange maple leaf. I worked on just one of the maple leaves on camera camera since it was going to be more of the same for the others. Later, I did keep in mind for the other maple leaves to keep them either warmer than the fox by making them more red-orange or cooler than the fox by adding red-violet leaf shadows. As for browning leaves, I added a generous olive-green mix to shift them to a different part of the spectrum. So I used green browns versus red browns where brown was used. Likewise, I made two types of the berries, the largest and the second from smallest, very purple. And even the berries I left red were a cooler cranberry with purple tones. Again, this contrasts with the warm reds, oranges, and browns elsewhere. I also guarded the few cool minty light green leaves assiduously. These were the round edged leaves at the bottom center. I gave them no shadows, just a quick light wash and then some veining and edging. I didn't want them to get warmer or darker. There is so much warmth in this piece that the purple berries and the sparse cool light green leaves are a needed relief from all that warmth. And notice that the light cool green doesn't clash with the other greens and colors in this piece. This is because I didn't go and get a new color from my paint box. I mixed that green from the 3 colors I limited myself to for this painting. As a result, there is assured color harmony. I can't accidentally hit a discordant color note. Always an awesome idea to have a limited color scheme. And because the long-tipped Billy Showell brush was tiring in painting all those berry shapes, as I discussed at length earlier, I decided not to use it to preserve light paper highlights for the smaller berries or to paint in highlights on top using white gouache. Instead, I used a white acid-free gel pen to dab in some very nice highlights. I could also have scraped out highlights with an X-Acto knife, like I've shown in my glass bubble lighthouse video. Spotting and berries and highlights aside, the fox and various leaves were great fun to paint with my Billy Showell watercolor brush. It really worked for larger areas and also tight corners. It made vein lines and leafy folds easier to do and carried a lovely amount of water and pigment all throughout. Well, wizards, I hope you enjoyed this foxy fall watercolor and my thoughts on Billy's brushes, color temperature, contrast, and so on. Thanks for parking your brushes here. Please like, comment, subscribe, and check out my website links and Patreon page to support this art channel below. If you're already my patron, thanks for being an excellent bird. If you're interested in buying my originals or prints, please email me or visit my website for info. As always, wishing you all epic art adventures.